Well, it's been a while, but finally we are back for 2024. It's time to talk law on Radio 97. Despina Priala of boutique law firm Priala Legal joins us from today, each and every Thursday at this time, to answer your burning legal questions. We unpack some big court cases and plenty of free general legal advice on the air every week. She has more than 30 years' experience in property and commercial law, and she's with us for the first time in 24. Happy New Year to you. Good morning, Despina.
Happy New Year to both of you as well. Good morning. It's so good to be back.
Good morning. Welcome back. It feels like forever, doesn't it? I don't know
It
about you.
does. It does.
Yeah.
Haven't we had a big, interesting start to the year as well, which we'll be talking about in a minute?
Yeah, slightly. It was so nice to hear, though. You actually had a visit while off air by one of our listeners. So we'll start off by saying good morning to lovely Lynn in Ocean Shores.
I did. Lynn came and saw me last week with her daughter, Lynn from Ocean Shores. So I wanted to say hello to Lynn and her daughter, and it was lovely meeting them last week.
So nice. Well, yes. Good morning, Lynn. Thanks for listening. So kicking off this morning, yes, we've had a very interesting break. I think all of us, except Wayne, who was in Sydney at the time, got to experience that storm/tornado that hit the Goldie and Tweed on Christmas Day. And this morning, Despina, you wanted to share with us maybe some advice in regards to insurance claims. What have you had for us this morning?
Yes, so everyone's aware, of course, of the natural disaster that hit the Gold Coast, and it was absolutely terrible. And obviously, feel for everybody that was impacted, whether it was small or substantially impacted from the natural disaster. What we want to focus on today is insurance. Now, it's not from the point of view of what are people claiming as a result of the natural disaster, because the local governments and state governments have put out a lot of information from early Jan about that. And that's fine. What we want to focus on are people under contract. Okay, so we talk about property law on many occasions on the show. And it occurred to me, and I've heard some terrible stories through early January, of people that were under contract at the time of the natural disaster. And what happens to that property as a result, and people's rights under that contract, the seller's rights and the buyer's rights, but particularly the stories that were coming out were talking about an uninsured property at the time of the natural disaster, and how can that be when the parties are under contract. So we want to talk a little bit about how it works in Queensland, again, as a reminder to people who do go under contract, what they should and should not do as a seller and as a buyer. Because unfortunately for these people who were under contract where the property was uninsured, you can imagine then it's an absolute nightmare to then deal with that property, the rectification, and also the parties' rights and what can and cannot be done. So let's talk about that for today. And it serves as a timely reminder, I think, when we go through it the next few minutes for people out there. So in Queensland, under contracts, the standard provisions are that the risk in the property, from an insurance perspective, I suppose really there, moves to the buyer. So once the contract is signed, and presumably the seller has already insured the property, most people do take out insurance. So the risk moves to the buyer. Now, what we discovered through January following the natural disaster is that some sellers, and we were hearing this from agents, some sellers then cancelled their insurance because they were under contract with a buyer, assuming that the buyer would then take out insurance, because that is the norm. The risk passes to the buyer from contract date. The buyer then should be taking out a cover note for insurance from that time until they complete, of course, and then the insurance continues, or maybe they terminate under their contract for whatever reason it is, lack of finance approval, for example. And then, of course, any cover note would be cancelled. So sellers would some sellers cancelled their insurance. The buyers, though, on the assumption that the buyer took out insurance. But then what if the buyer didn't take out insurance?
So that does happen. That does happen.
It does happen. So we tell buyers from day one, you need to understand under the contract, the property is now at your risk. That's what the contract says in the REIQ. So you now need to take out an insurance cover. Now, we can't be in control of what the buyer does. We're here to inform the buyer of their rights. So, and their obligations. So interestingly, some buyers don't take out insurance. We know this because we get closer to settlement and the buyer then tells us, oh, by the way, I'm now taking out insurance. So you go, oh, okay, well, we did tell you 3 weeks ago to take out insurance because it's at your risk.
Is that because of money?
I think
Trying to save a few dollars.
Yes, I think that is the reason that they're trying to save money, or maybe they just forget. Maybe they didn't read the material that we send them.
Maybe they didn't listen to their solicitor. Yes.
Yes, exactly right. So then in that situation, you've got a buyer not taking out insurance. And then you have a seller under the same contract, same property, who then cancels their insurance. And then you're left with an uninsured property at the time that a natural disaster hits.
Like Christmas Day. Yep.
Exactly.
So who's doing the naughty? Who's at fault in that case then?
It's an interesting one because the seller by right should maintain that insurance cover.
Yeah.
There's nothing in the contract to say that they have to, but common sense should prevail. And really, you've had that insurance cover all this time, an extra 2, 3, 4 weeks of
another couple of weeks.
True.
It shouldn't make any difference to you. It's a wrong assumption to assume the buyer will take out insurance because the seller's never told, well, here's the buyer's insurance cover. It doesn't work like that when you're under contract in Queensland. So you've got situations, an uninsured property. Now, when the natural disaster hit, properties that were substantially affected and some houses were uninhabitable, what happens then and what are the parties' rights? So a buyer, if a property's been substantially damaged, a buyer can terminate a contract under the Property Law Act. Even with the new Property Law Act that's been passed, we're awaiting still royal assent for this year. But the Property Law Act provides that the buyer can terminate in that situation before a settlement and before taking possession by notice to the seller. So there is room in the new provisions for the seller to rectify the damage. But you see, at a practical level, what seller would be able to rectify damage to a property, substantial damage, when there is no recourse to claim against your insurer because you've cancelled your insurance?
And of course, we did see some very substantial damage on the Gold Coast and up in the hinterland on Christmas night.
Horrendous. And I've spoken to a lot of people that were affected. And this, unfortunately, sometimes you have to learn from natural disasters. It's not the way that it should be, but sometimes it is, that when you go under contract, the lesson and the message today is do not cancel your insurance as an owner of a property. Wait until your contract settles with the buyer, then ring the insurance company that day or the next day and say, yes, cancel my policy, please, from whatever day settlement took place. Very, very important. You do not want to be placed in a situation where you've cancelled your insurance, the buyer never took out insurance, your property's been substantially damaged, and your buyer can walk away from your contract. So then you're left with no buyer, no settlement monies because they don't have to settle, and you've got a property uninsured. And how are you going to rectify it?
Yeah. Is it wise then as a buyer just to be safe that before you sign, you just confirm that, look, your insurance is going to be in place until I take over? Is that a wise conversation to have?
It normally doesn't happen that way because really the buyer can't control what the seller does. And everyone assumes that insurance stays in place. It's an interesting question, though, whether a buyer should ask for a copy of the insurance policy. If it's in a strata complex, of course, you can get a copy of the body corporate insurance. That's different. We're really talking about standalone houses or even duplexes. Where is the insurance cover? So perhaps that might generate, new inquiries from day one about insurance cover.
Yeah, there you go. Great advice as always, Despina. Thank you so much. And if anyone does want to get in touch directly, you can anytime just visit prialalegal.com.au. Thank you so much again, Despina. We'll talk next Thursday.
See you then, guys.
Are you confused about legal jargon? Do you need legal advice but don't know where to turn? Tune in.